And for a closer look at Korea's latest free trade agreement, we have Dr. Byoung-joo, head of KL&P Consulting, and of course our regular commentator on this program joining us live in the studio. Hello, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So the latest free trade agreement by Korea signed, or actually in principle has been concluded. What are some of the most interesting parts of this agreement?
As Hwang Ji just has reported, I think key sticking points for this negotiation were ISD on the side of Australia and the agriculture side on agriculture issues on the Korean side. And the actually ISD investor-state dispute related cause actually was the real sticking point. Australia, as you may all be aware of, is a country with lots of natural resources. So that country is very hesitant to have a clause that actually allows the third party at the time of dispute between foreign investor and then the local businesses be resolved elsewhere outside of the country. So even though Australia is a very open country in terms of economic openness, that ISD side is something that Australia has not been willing to accept. Korea has accepted ISD clause with the United States and European Union, and it has become a big issue here in this country. And Australia was saying no to this. And in fact, what Australia did with the United States, I think even in their FTA agreement back in 2004, they actually agreed not to include ISD. Even though Korea has, as I said, has been willing to accept that ISD, and Korea wanted to have it here included because it was so contentious here at home. If we exclude that with Australia in our FTA, that could be another very controversial point. So finally, Australia agreed to have it included. So that was a big progress, and that's one very important point to be noted. In addition to, of course, in return to that, in addition to that, of course, the fact that Korea had to accept in return rather far-reaching openness in terms of our agricultural side. So I think those 2 points are most noted points in this announced agreements.
Now, this agreement seems quite far-reaching in terms of market liberalization for the two sides. How does this compare with the Korea-US or the Korea-EU trade pact?
I think we still need a lot of details. The details will be actually publicized probably beginning of next year when they do the initializing. So we don't have much of the information. We have to rely upon the government's announcements so far. And based on those facts that have been announced by the government so far, I think it's rather considerably far-reaching agreement in terms of seeking a great openness here. As Hwang Ji reported, Korea is Australia's number 4 trading partner, and Australia is Korea's number 7 trading partner. So it is very important to have a greater openness in terms of FTA. The thing is, when we talk about FTA, just FTA setup itself does not mean much. You really got to have, in order to have a meaningful FTA, you got to have a far-reaching agreement in terms of opening markets on both sides. And this time, I think seems to be the case. As I mentioned, the agriculture side is a very important area, and Korea seems to have agreed quite considerable openness on the agricultural side. That is the reduction of the tariff on beef imports coming from Australia for the next several years, up until for the next 15 years, cutting down tariff by like 2 to 3% every year, and then getting rid of entire tariff, which stands at 40% at this point in 15-year period of time. So after 15 years from now, we'll get to enjoy Australian beef like 40% cheaper than what we enjoy right at this point. So that's a big deal. And in addition to that, of course, this FTA, according to the government announcement so far, has all these areas of not only the products, but also the different kinds of investments, service, and IT, telecom, electronic commerce, and government procurement. So this is, in scope-wise, also very extensive agreement. So we are indeed talking about, at least judging from the facts that we know so far, very far-reaching in terms of openness as well as the extensiveness.
Now, speaking of Australian beef, we know that Korean consumers have been enjoying Australian beef for quite some time now.
Right.
Now, it sounds like then this Australia Trade Pact might raise some concerns among Korean farmers, somewhat like what we saw before in other free trade pacts where it involved a lot of opening up to agricultural or farming products.
Right, that's so true indeed. Your observation is so true. Australian beef is already #1 in terms of market share in this country here at this point. And we are being told Australian beef as of last year was taking up close to 57% overall in the beef market here, as opposed to U.S. beef, which was taking up as of the last year about 39% here. So big difference between U.S. beef and Australian beef. So if that tariff goes all the way down to 0 in 15 years, who knows what's going to happen? Actually, I think in my understanding, U.S. beef will actually enjoy 0 tariff quicker before than Australian beef does, because in terms of U.S.-Korea agreement, it's a 12 years period as opposed to 15 years period with regard to Australian beef. So it will be interesting dynamics we'll be watching in terms of this beef market here in Korea for the next 12, 15 or 10 years or so. So a lot of eyes will be watching. Now already Korean cattle growers as well as farmers are talking about considerable and serious compensation for their loss. But then again, for the past several decades, we are very much used to this agricultural side's demands for greater compensation. So it will remain as a political issue. And I think Korean public has built kind of like an internal resistance to additional greater compensation every time big FTAs come in. So I'll be closely watching for one, how much more greater compensation the government will be offering to the agricultural market. But indeed, agriculture is a key issue here.
Now, another free trade agreement, which is bigger and a mega-sized regional one that Korea has been considering recently, is a TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Right.
Now, how or will this Korea-Australia bilateral trade pact impact Korea's participation in the TPP?
One observation would be because ISD, Investor State Dispute clause, was a big sticking point in TPP's negotiation itself because of Australia's opposition so far. Since Australia removed this resistance in the case of Korea's bilateral agreement, if indeed Australia goes for willingness of removal of their resistance in TPP negotiation, actually TPP negotiation could speed up. So this Korea-Australian bilateral agreement could actually, in theory at least, speed up the TPP negotiation. But then again, we need more time on this, and as I mentioned before, there's a rumor that TPP agreement may get wrapped up quickly within about a week period of time from now on, whatever. So, they may actually go ahead with ISD not included in TPP. These are all speculation. We'll have to wait and see on that one. At least in theory, what I know for sure is multilateral negotiation that involves more than, I suppose, 2 parties involved. Usually their level of openness cannot be, at least in theory, as far-reaching as bilateral ones, because in bilateral ones you can come up with all this give and take, and you can have a really far-reaching agreement. So my guess will be TPP will be a less far-reaching as opposed to or compared to this kind of bilateral agreement that was announced today.
So what's ahead after today's announcement? What kind of steps remain until this Korea-Australia FTA goes into effect?
Well, we have, first of all, initialing process where both sides says, oh, this is the agreement that has been agreed. And after that, of course, there has to be a full signature or full signing of the agreement after both sides fully review all the text. And after that, another very challenging process of getting the ratification on both sides of the legislature. Always Korea has had some issues about that. And I think we will be expecting some political resistance, especially from the agricultural side here. And when that's all done, at least at this point, the expectation is we will have a Korea-Australia FTA fully in implementation by 2015. That's assuming that we will not have a major trouble on the way. So that is the schedule for now.
So it looks like we still have quite a way to go on top of the 4 years and 7 months that it took in order to get to this point from the first beginning process of this negotiation.
That's for sure, yeah.
All right, Dr. Kim Byoung-joo, thank you so much for today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay.